Do I need to record? Do you want me to record locally?
Uh, it's all right. No,
No.
I've got a
I
good
mean,
mic.
I should be good from here.
It sounds fine. Right. Okay. Okay. We are recording. Guy, how are you today?
I'm very, very well. The sun is shining. There's stuff going on here. I've got all sorts of good news happening work-wise. Yeah, um, really good.
Is that a glockenspiel above your head?
No, it's not. It's quite funny because when Gary Kemp and myself do our Rock on Tours podcasts, we tend to dress if we're at home. We tend to dress our background with stuff that's relevant to our guests. There will be a relevant guitar. Gary usually has a mint condition LP of theirs. But we had, I can't say when's this going out?
This will probably be out in about a month's time.
Oh, okay. Well, we probably have been on by then. Yeah, because that's actually, it looks like a glockenspiel. It's a barlafon, which is a beautiful West African instrument, and a kora, because we had a very eminent West African guest um, on Rock on Tours, and I've had these things for like 35 years, so it was brilliant to be able to get them out.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, look, before we do anything else, let's just talk a little bit about rock and tours because as somebody that has been doing this podcast for close to 4 years now and gets to interview some amazing people, I then look at the list of who you've had on your podcast, and I'm incredibly jealous. I mean, you and Gary have knocked it out of the park, haven't you?
Oh, thank you. Well, kind of. I mean, we're still feeling like that we're not cracking the big ones. We're not getting our Townsends or McCartneys.
Yeah.
There's always a box to tick, isn't there? But no, it has been amazing because it started off with, we were right in the beginning, it was just mates. And then at times it has been a struggle. It has been a bit of a struggle, but it's a matter of getting yourself on that list, isn't it? Where
Yeah.
people, because the thing is that we try to impress upon people when people say, well, they're not doing promo at the moment. And it's like, that's actually when we want people.
Yeah.
We don't want to talk about your new album,
Totally.
Sorry, I mean, in the nicest possible way.
No, I totally agree. I think and it's what I try and do with this as well. Is sort of do that deep dive and that peek behind the curtain and get stuff that it isn't a little anecdote and plug in the current thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, if they have got something, we'll talk about that at the end. But I prefer to kind of just have that deeper dive, and I think that's very much what you and Gary do as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because a lot of it is, I'm sure it's the same for you, is that a podcast is something that people discover and then they go back and listen at their leisure. So it's the less time sensitive it is,
Yeah.
the better. Although there's an interesting thing during lockdown, I was trying to think of something I could do as a sort of, contribution. So, people were saying, why don't you do bass lessons, online bass lessons? And I was like, well, I can't because I don't really know how to play the bass, frankly. And, but so I had this idea of doing lockdown licks where every week I would just show you a song that I played on and show you how I did it on the bass. And which went down fantastically well. And it was really good fun for me. But what's interesting is because people still leave comments on it. And when they do, that takes me back to the video. And one of the main reasons I'm glad I did it now is it serves as such a great diary of where we were because I'm chatting, and how heavy it was, man.
Yeah.
We forget how heavy it was, So, that's why all this stuff is great rather than as a current thing, just as the podcasts are great time capsules.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is where we were at that moment.
It is weird. I was listening to. I spoke to you and Gary for the Pop Bubble magazine a few weeks back, and I went back and listened to some older episodes and hearing sort of Noel Gallagher saying he can't wait to just do a gig again and just to play live music, and you just think it feels a lifetime away, but it really wasn't. It was it was only just a couple of years ago, but it's so strange hearing people talking about that. Not being able to be in a room with their friends and make music. It was it's a mad little
and it felt like it felt like it was never going to be really behind us.
Absolutely.
I remember that there was that whole thing of that you had that period of I'd be watching a movie and whenever there was a nightclub scene or anything, you just feel like, oh, Oh, what is that?
Well, I run a nightclub. That's been my, another one of my jobs for the last 30 years. And we was the first thing to close and we was the last thing to reopen, much like live music.
Well, yeah, exactly. I
And
was saying, yeah, we were absolutely the last people who were going to go back to work.
yeah, and it was surreal when it reopened and to see large amounts of people dancing and enjoying themselves in a small area again. It just looked alien, which is surreal when you think
Yeah,
for the last 28 years that's just been my weekends. And
yeah.
but yeah, it's a thing of the past now,
Thing of the
hopefully.
past,
And
yes.
right, let's get your playlist starting. And I'm going to ask you for track one to tell me the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please, Guy.
Right. Well, first thing I'm going to add a big caveat to all of these things in
Okay.
that there isn't a greatest of anything. This is the greatest intro of all time for me. For the simple reason that it's the intro that changed my life, and it's probably why I'm sitting here talking to you today. Because if it wasn't for this song, I don't know that I would have. This is what made me decide to be a musician, and it's Barbara O'Reilly by The Who.
An incredible, incredible intro and song. But tell me why that inspired you to start. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's such a call to arms of a track anyway. Why
Well,
wouldn't you want
that's
to be a rock star?
it's exactly what it's because of the moment. I mean, I can tell you, I've recounted this a million times. It's in my book, but it was I was on a family holiday in Holyhead, and I had these two cousins, a good one and a bad one. They were really cartoonish, and I adored them and worshipped them both. And the bad one had just bullied me into smoking, right? And because I'd got out of smoking, I was 13 or 12. But and the funny thing is that everyone who was going to smoke was smoking by then. And so I kind of missed that. So I kind of thought I got away with it, but then he sort of forced me into it, and I thought he was really cool. And so I'd been smoking for a couple of days out on our little dinghy, and then this was the first day that I took a cigarette down. And this was round at their house, their rented house. And I immediately felt totally nauseous and sick, and I had to go upstairs and lie down on his bed. And I lay down and feeling sick, and I basically passed out. And when I came round, I noticed there was this cassette player right by the bed. I think it was a Sony TC68 because I was much more interested in tech than music then.
So specific.
And I was obsessed with Sony. Yeah, there was the TC68 and the TC66. And in fact, the case of the TC66 became the battery case to hold the 75 massive batteries, whatever you need, for the first Sony portable CD player.
Wow.
I used to spend all my holidays. I used to spend all my holidays at the school holidays at the Sony showroom on Regent Street. I was totally into that shit. So music was just something you played on tech to me at that point. I loved it. So anyway, but I just hit play, and this came out, and it was and it was just a thing of that synth sound. You'd never heard anything like it. And it's not a synth. It's just a home organ. And it's not going through any filters or anything. It's just a setting on, I think it's the Chamberlain, whatever, home organ. Pete Townsend has actually played it to me on the organ in his studio. That happened last year. Yeah, which was just mind-blowing.
And I presume you recounted that
didn't
story.
ask him to. I didn't ask him to. No, I didn't tell him the story. I did not know because you're with Pete. Pete's always on. It's when you're working, it was like being at a 3-day TED talk, and he was talking about something else. He was talking about something to do with synthesis and envelopes. And I go, oh yeah, all right. And he played on, and he just happened to be playing on the synth that was next to this one. And then he moved over and said, but of course this one you can do this. And then he went dugga 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 dugga. I was like, what? And then he just carried on. And just played the intro to Barbara O'Reilly. And it's then, but everything about it, there's the way the drums then come in. And what's incredible, because the one thing that Mooney, I always think, doesn't get credit for is that his actual tempo, his timekeeping was incredible. Incredible. He was like, especially some of the stuff on Tommy, because for all the bonkersness of the fills, his actual underlying time is so solid. And on this, it absolutely isn't. He comes in and he slows down massively and then realizes that he can't change tempo and then pulls back up to speed. And then it's the best bass sounds Entwistle ever had on anything. Well, this and Quadrophenia are basically the only two records where he sounded like he was playing a bass guitar.
Yeah.
And then there's the piano, which is quite a hokey piano sound. And then the guitar. And then Roger comes in screaming, and I remember the thing was just like, fuck, I've just never heard anyone mean something that much. don't even know what he means. And it was this thing of we're out in the fields and working, and it immediately conjures up all these fantastic pictures of anything from John Betjeman to, and
It
that was
sounds
it,
like it's got so much purpose, doesn't it? Right from the
Yeah,
off.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, right from the off. It really is. It's like, I'll follow you anywhere,
Yeah.
and that's what it is. What's amazing is that Stephen Wilson recently did a remix of it, and I happened to be up at his house for some other reason, and he had the multi-track. And so I got to hear it broken down.
Wow.
And what's amazing is it's 8 tracks. And it's one of those things of when you split it all up, the individual elements actually aren't that great.
Oh,
Do you know what I mean? It's
really?
like, it's not particular. I mean, it's Glyn Johns, it's beautiful work, but it's not particularly hi-fi recording. And it's literally, it's just like, it's a stereo of the synth, the keyboard, 2 tracks of drums, 1 track piano, 1 track bass, and 1 guitar. It's just 1 guitar. It's not even double tracks.
Wow.
And it's, and just the shit. And that's what it is. It's, I think, because that's always been the thing that gets me with Pete is like, especially with his solo record, what amazes me about Pete Townshend's music is not how much guitar there is on it, but how little.
Yeah.
Compared to any other rock band, it's like guitars are quiet. And that's the only album where he ever had anything like a full-on distorted rock sound. Quadrophenia doesn't. He's a rock and roll player, not a rock player.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Like
That's so true on Quadrophenia, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no sustain where he's doing all the big solo-y stuff on Love Our Own. It's bing. There's no sustain. He's making you listen to him, not the guitar.
Love it. Right, well, I'm going to take you back now. And for track 2, I'm going to ask you to tell me, please, Guy, the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please.
Yes, and it's She's Leaving Home by the Beatles, because I remember, I don't know where I found them. It was up in a room when I was very young. My stepdad just had this little collection, again, a perfect little time capsule of his music moment in the 60s, right? And he had Sergeant Pepper, Wheels of Fire, the Cream live album, Highway 61 Revisited, and Deja Vu by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I mean, you couldn't ask for a more perfect
ticking all the boxes
set of
there.
Albums. Just ticks every box. It's so, and I salute you, Martin, for that. And I just remember putting on Sergeant Pepper. And I knew the Beatles, and it's the Beatles, but I just remember hearing She's Leaving Home and just thinking, I just couldn't believe someone had written that. Yeah. And it was just so, and I kind of, things like, as a kid, things like A Man from the Motor Trade.
Yeah.
Just kind of, mean something to you as opposed to someone talking about some baby or, or anything. It was just the down to earthness of it, and just of people going upstairs and downstairs, and describing the geography of a house, because I'm a kid, that's what I know. Because it was a great thing that when we had Andrew Loog Oldham on the podcast, there's a brilliant thing he said, because a lot of people said Tony King had exactly the same experience, which was hearing Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis, which has just absolutely changed. But he made this great point. He said, man, but when I heard that, I'd never had my heart broken and I'd never stayed in a hotel. Which is so true. So you're dealing with this abstract imagery. And I think that was the thing with She's Leaving Home, was that there's things in a house and there's kitchen tables and I think when you're a kid, having something that real, to get a hold of is why that really moved me.
And I think that's the case, though, isn't it? I think up until then, music it's just there, isn't it? It's just sweet sounds that sort of, I don't know, sort of bounce around your head and make you move a little. And then I think it's that first song where, and it can be lyrics quite a lot of the time, where all of a sudden something sort of hits you on a different level. You're like, oh, hang on, like what's he saying?
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. Well, the most obvious one is how all love songs are silly. Love songs are just silly. Love. He loves him and she loves it. And it's just silly. And then you fall in love.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh my God, rewrite the whole book. All
so
of those songs are suddenly the most profound thing ever.
Yeah.
So I remember, when you're trying to write songs and I go, yeah, I love you write something about love. You don't know what, but as soon as you fall in love, it's, you suddenly realize, suddenly pop music has become just the absolute harbinger of the world.
And then comes the first heartbreak, and then it's like, right, now get the pen. There's a few albums here,
You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because until then, it's just like, what's he talking about?
Absolutely. So tell me about childhood. Where did you grow up, Guy?
I grew up in Waterloo.
Okay.
And do you know what? I went to the National Theatre the other night. I went up to town for the press night of Richard Hawley's musical.
Oh, how was that?
It's amazing. I cannot recommend it enough. Everyone's got to go and see it. Standing at the edge of the sky, or the sky's edge. It's amazing. But because I was there, right? And I went and took pictures of the first time. I went and took pictures of the flat where I was born, which is in the Cut. Because, mate, I've got to tell you something. The most mental thing has happened. I've been slowly moving out of London in the last few years. I moved to Brighton about 12 years ago. And we've now moved to Alfriston. We're right on the South Downs. I'm nowhere. There's one house within half a mile of us, right? Well, that way. There's a village that way. And it's about half a mile around on the track. But the guy is actually literally just next door. And I went over and spent the evening with him the other night. He's our neighbour. Lovely, lovely man. Getting on a bit. And as are we all. But sorry, this is going somewhere. And we started talking about our lives and everything. I said how I was from South London. He said he'd lived in South London. By the end of it, we ascertained that in the last week of December 1961, he bought and moved into Flat E, number 71, The Cut. On January the 3rd, 1962, I was born in Flat B, 71, The Cut. So my neighbor was literally 5 yards down the hall when I was born.
That's insane.
It's insane, isn't it?
Do you know what? Like, I don't want to be a topper, but that's just tipped something in my head. Like, just reminded me of something. Right, about 3 years ago, during lockdown, I was dropping my daughter to work. She worked in a hotel, and I was dropping into there first thing in the morning, and we unfortunately saw somebody run a police officer over. And so we stopped and helped the police officer and et cetera. Anyway, somebody that saw it as well chased the person that done it. And then we both ended up in the police station to give our statements. I was sitting next to this guy and I was chatting. I said, like, oh, that was a weird thing that we were the only two people about. And, we both witnessed this terribly, awful thing. And so I then get chatting to him and like, oh, where do you live? Blah, blah, blah. And he lived in the house that I grew up in. And it was like, you just think like, I said, what number? And he was like, 6. I was like, I lived there. And he was like, oh yeah, my parents, like the parents must have bought it off of my parents. And it was like, just this weird situation where I don't generally hang out in police stations, but I was there because of this really awful thing that happened. That was quite strange. And it turns out, the guy that also witnessed it lived in the house that I grew up in. Quite surreal. Anyway, we digress. I want to talk more about.
That's what I do, though. That's what I do.
About that's podcasters, I think. Kind of. So I take it, aside from the sort of handful of records and good records, was home quite musical? Was would Mum have the radio on and things like that?
Yeah. Obviously, my dad was big, but he didn't live with us. He lived in Chelsea, and because he was a songwriter before he was an actor. And do you know what? One of the things that's been occurring to me lately is that he lived in this. It was quite a grotty flat. It was just 2 doors down from Led Zeppelin's office, up at the World's End on King's Road. And he lived which was about 100 yards from Malcolm and Vivian's shop.
Right.
And he was really good mates with Tom Salter, who had Salter's Cafe, whose daughter Gabby went on to marry Joe Strummer. And what's one of the things there's so many things that are sad about my dad. He died incredibly young. He was 45, and it was in 1976. And I just think, being where he was, if he'd been around, because he loved music so much, and he loved mischief, that if he hadn't died then, he would have loved punk, and they would have loved him. You know what I mean? And he was right there. And I just think that's such a shame, because he was a real hippie. I mean, he was a full on. Long hair.
But living on top of that,
Yeah.
in '77 would have been remarkable, wouldn't
Yeah. I
it?
mean, he died in '76. The shame it was
Gosh.
just happening. So
So how old was you when he passed, Guy?
I was 14, and that's probably why I play the bass, because it was the last thing he ever gave me. It was for that
Yeah,
Christmas and birthday, and my mum and dad, they clubbed together and got me this bass guitar. And it's only once you get older you kind of realize, well, it's obviously he gave me a bass, and that was the last thing he told me. So
yeah,
that's what I did. So never occurred to me to do anything else.
yeah.
I
Oh
shouldn't. I
well.
mean, although if he hadn't died, he probably would have said, "Don't be stupid, go to college."
Well, you mentioned education. There's a lovely little tenuous link there to track through, and I'm going to ask you to tell me the song that reminds you of your time at school, please, Guy.
Oh yes, and this isn't and I was trying to think. There's a few of them, but
You can have some
this is.
honourable mentions, mate.
Yeah, yeah, okay. I'm going to say, because I didn't particularly like this. The funny thing is I've only just recently appreciated how brilliant this album is. But the song that I just every house, right? I went to a boarding school. Okay, it wasn't that posh. It was me, Youth, and Alex Patterson were all there. So, um, uh, but we had houses. There were like 6 actual separate houses around the building. We all know I was in Bradford. Youth and Alex were in Sheffield. There was Durham, Knowledge, and each house had, just to show you how old they were. Each house had a room called a jazz cellar, which was like your one real sanctuary. It would be next to the common room, and you had like some shitty little record player, probably an Amstrad sort of stereo.
Yeah.
And it was where you could go and play your music. It was the only place you could go and listen to music. And I just remember the one song that came blaring out of every jazz cellar in every house was Dreamer by Supertramp.
It's a great pop record.
It's a brilliant pop record, but it's quite, because people are into all sorts of stuff. I mean, it was quite. I got a lot of musical education from school.
Yeah.
A lot of people were into Man and Deep
Okay. Yeah.
Level.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were really big. Uriah Heep, who I never really liked.
Yeah.
There was a lot of real rock, because I was never really a rock guy.
Right.
Apart from Zeppelin. Zeppelin was the only real rock. I was a rock and roll bloke, if you know what I mean. It was The Who, it was Springsteen, the Stones.
Yeah.
So yeah, but Dreamer, that for some reason that was that. And one of my favorite memories from school was having to just play games, or to have to do some evening games thing. It might have been a detention, and I was out on the playing fields, and Durham House was up at the top of the field. You could see it. And my old mate Anthony Blompier, who I'm still in touch with, who now lives in Brussels, works for their film archive. He had the jazz cellar, and he had the window open, and he was playing "I'm In with the In Crowd" by Brian Ferry, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it was so great. Which I played with Brian last time I was on tour with him, and it was just so magical, because that is one of my absolute childhood. Because that ba da bam, I mean, it's like a Barbara O'Reilly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just
Absolutely.
one of those great. And while I was down the pitch, he was looking at me, and I was miming the guitar, like da da da. And we'd just been doing sound in physics, and he said that was the most brilliant description of of how fast sound travels, was watching you do windmills and how long it took to reach me up at Durham House.
Wonderful. Did Did you have any idea what you wanted to do when you was at school?
Before music.
Yeah. Or was music always going to be what you wanted to do, or and was that encouraged at school?
No, I did the clarinet. No, I actually won a competition. They found the lyrics to some old psalm, some 16th century psalm or something, and there was a competition to write music for it. And whoever won that competition would have their music played on the chapel organ and have the school choir sing that psalm, right? I won that competition, and I still wasn't allowed to take O-level music.
No way.
Yeah, and I wanted piano lessons, but they were full. All that was open to me was the violin or the clarinet. So I did the clarinet for a bit. But then I just spent my entire life in the music school with my bass guitar. So,
Yeah.
no help, assistance, nothing, encouragement, nothing from anyone,
And
because it
and
wasn't a real
so,
instrument.
I was very interested in like areas that the people grew up in and the opportunities that lie within them, uh, and certainly within the arts. And growing up in London, and your dad obviously having a history of being a very, creative musician. Like, did it feel, as somebody that wanted to sort of carve a career in music, that it was possible?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, I don't really know. It was, what's really interesting is how, because what I should say, that because when I did start playing, which was with youth, with Martin
Yeah.
Glover as he was then, and he'd show it because, he's such a hustler, which is why for all his fabulous hippie outward, he's the most brilliant empire builder I've ever known, who works everything to his advantage. And I say that as an absolute compliment.
Yeah.
And he managed to get us this attic above the gym. It was incredible. It was like our own den. It was above the kitchen. It was above the gym and the kitchen. And it was just ours to do whatever we wanted with. And we sort of had a couple of old Dansette record players we wired up as amps. And we had all our well, they weren't posters, but they were ads cut out from NME and Melody Maker, just be all ads for Bowie records and, whatever. And we had this, and that was the most, so that, I guess, is the only encouragement I ever had. I mean, that was fun, but there was a very strong feeling, I think, back then, that before punk, there really was this thing of there were 5 bands, and you were either in one of them, or that was it, because it was, there was the pub rock thing happening, but it was also, it was like, it was Pink Floyd, it was Led Zeppelin, it was the Eagles, it was just so kind of Mount Olympus by that point, that, that's why that had to happen, because there was none of the music you wanted to play, for all the fucking misty-eyed, rose-colored glasses thing about Radio 1. Radio 1 was shit, right? It's, I didn't want to, yes, we love Motown, but I didn't want to play for Diana Ross.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There was nothing that really, there would be the odd Bowie, the odd Roxy Music, the odd, but it was rubbish. And, and music just exists. As Geldof says, punk happened in the music press.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great, to shout out your podcast again, that's a great episode. Speaking,
it's not really a podcast, it's more of a Reith lecture, really, isn't it?
Parental guidance warning on that one as well. It's a great listen, that is. I'm going to sprinkle in a couple of questions that just because of seeing the amount of artists that you've worked with, insane. And I love the fact on your podcast that anybody that gets brought up in some capacity, there is a link to how you have been involved with them in their career at some point. I love that. So I just
do you know what's really interesting?
Go on.
Is the different ways that Gary approaches it, which can tell you how it is with the guests. Is like, for instance, when we had Dave Davis on from the Kinks, and we're all sort of really honored and just trying to be gentle and kind, and we're just so thrilled he's there. And it came up that I'd played on Kirsty MacColl's version of Days.
Yeah.
And so Gary said, yes, you see, Dave, very often we find this, that Guy has a connection in some way with our guests, nice. When Paddy Considine was on, and it turns out that I played on a film that he was in, Gary's just like, it gets fucking boring, I tell you.
And that was a great interview as well, that one. I love the fact that, obviously a lot of people aren't aware that Paddy's consistently put out great records.
They're great records. They're really good. Yeah.
And it's annoying that people can be so multi-talented. I'm going to ask you about a couple of the artists that you work with throughout this podcast. Tell me a little bit, because I'm a big fan. Tell me a little bit about working with Stephen Tintin Duffy.
Oh, Stephen. Well, that was, I adored Stephen, and we started a production team. We were going to be Happening Productions, and we co-wrote a song for which he did as a duet with Sandy from Sandy and the Sunsets, and we had and everything was going fantastic. We discovered ecstasy together. This was long before the rave scene or anything. And it was a great, lovely time. I loved working with Stephen. We wrote together, we produced together, but then we had this slightly awkward thing where I split up with my girlfriend, and I did it right. No one's actually at fault here. No one's done anything wrong, really. But I split up with my girlfriend, and then I went away to see my granny, who lived in Cyprus, for a holiday, to sort of get over it. And I just had time of my life. But when I came back, my ex had moved in with Stephen.
Okay.
which was somewhat awkward. And he suddenly was, because all of Stephen's songs were about unrequited love and you
Yeah.
know, I love you and you don't know how much I love and how that crushes a blow and all that. And suddenly he's rewriting all his lyrics to this must be the start of something special and everything's wonderful. And it all got a bit awkward. And then so he then started the Lilac Time, which is actually which was all people I knew, which is all the people I knew from the sort of social circle I'd had with Kate, my girlfriend. And so I think I just sort of went off somewhere else, you know, as kind of, but actually he did, but I mean, he had a very clearly defined path with the Lilac Time, which was fantastic. And I clearly had places to go. So it was, it all worked out fine in the end, but it was very, very funny. But that was a very interesting lesson for me about male ego, because I thought I was immune to male ego. I thought male ego was just, hey, I'm an airline pilot, hey, you know, and being really cool. But in fact, it's nothing to do with that at all. Well, so yeah, that's. But I adored Stephen. He was brilliant and a great wit, and through that, yeah, that's how I met Trish Renane, who's a lifelong friend. So yeah, and in fact, I was brought to Stephen by Tarquin Gotch, who again still looks after me and is one of the producers of Raconteurs. So it was all part of a nice. It was a very healthy pool.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean. As far as my life going forwards was concerned.
Wonderful. Tell me the first record you were buying from a record shop, please, Guy.
Now, I don't know. It's either, I mean, you know, does the Monster Mash count? I mean, that was because I think my mum probably bought that probably before I had
your pocket money. What did you get with your pocket money?
I don't. It's either my Mama, We're All Crazy Now.
Oh, what a record!
Or Crazy Horses by the Osmonds.
Do you know what? Your first record was meant to be embarrassingly shit, and you've chose two stonkers there, mate. They're cracking tunes.
No, but they are. But the Osmonds was the Osmonds.
I guess they weren't looked upon as being cool, I guess, but like that's a tune. You listen back to it now.
That's the same sort of mental anguish that I go through years later when I went to see Pink Floyd do The Wall at Earl's Court and go, my God, this is the best thing I've ever seen. But it can't be. I'm dressed like Joe Strummer. It can't be.
Oh, I love it. Tell me about your relationship with the record shop over the years, Guy.
Oh, well, it was very sweet because something came up with there was a lovely thing where my old friend Anthony, who was my best friend at primary school, the one time when the Who did those classic shows, they played at the Kilburn Gaumont for The Kids Are All Right, but in fact they couldn't use that. They ended up going into Shepperton, but they did this show, and this one I never saw the Who with Mooney. It was just broadcast on Capital Radio 2 hours before the Who are doing a show at the Kilburn Gaumont. Get down there. That's all they announced. And my friend Anthony heard that on the radio, and what's so sweet is he said, and I think it was it during the whole? Yeah, it was during the holiday. So this is when we were at boarding school. We were at boarding school together at this point. And so he said, because of course he called me at home and I wasn't there. So he then went and tried everywhere he thought he could find me. And the two places were Shaw's, which was this little, remember when there always used to be these mini department stores everywhere? Shaw's was this department store on Waterloo Road, just by Waterloo Station. And the downstairs was the camera and record department. And that's where we used to live all the time, ogling the little Kodak Instamatics and records. And so that's what I learned about there. And then there was at the top of Lower Marsh, there was Sundown Records, which I think is quite a renowned record shop. I mean, it's long gone, obviously, but it but I think it was called something else before. So but that was the thing, that was where when I wasn't at the Sony Centre, the Sony showroom on Regent Street, I was either in Shaw's or at Sundown Records. And there's an interesting thing I was saying, because shops are a great way of noting the different parts of your life, right? Because there's the record shop, and then when you get a bit older, there's the clothes shop combined with the record shop. Then you add the book shop, then the kind of, to me, then the bookshop over supersedes the record shop. And then as you get into middle age, then it becomes the kitchen shop, finally ending at the garden centre. That is your life in retail.
You know what? Honestly, I said to myself, I said to my wife the other day, I was like, was kicking around on a Sunday with nothing to do. I said, should we go and have a coffee? And I walked around the garden centre and she went, will you check yourself? And I was like, fucking hell, I did say that out loud, didn't I? And I was like, yeah, look, we ain't ready for that yet. But yeah, you slip into these things so easily, Guy.
Oh, I know. No, my missus has the thing. I always know when she's driving down here, I know that I have to add like at least 3/4 of an hour to the time because she cannot drive past Chessington. She can't do it. She cannot get, there's this massive great garden centre and it's sitting there and she just, mind you need to see my house, man. It says, like I said, the place I lived in Brighton, I needed a machete to get into the shower. So
right, look, we've got to get some rock and roll chat going. Yeah. We're going down a bad place if we're talking garden centres, mate. You mentioned clothes and music there, and I listened to your episode talking to the legend that is Johnny Marr, yes. and his love affair with clothes. It seems to have been always as strong as his love affair with music. Tell me a little bit about working with electronic.
Oh, well, I mean, Johnny's one of my dearest, oldest friends. I mean, he's and anyone, I imagine you've probably met Johnny, haven't you?
No, he's evaded me. When I set this podcast up, Guy, I had 2 guests that I wanted to get on, and it was Maxine Peake and Johnny Marr. I've had Maxine, I've had Niall on, but I've not had Johnny. He evades me.
Oh dear. But I bet you've never met anyone who has met him who has anything other to say than he is one of the finest people to ever walk God's earth.
That doesn't help. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah. He's just, and do you know, there's this fantastic thing I have now is that because my son is at uni in Manchester, so I have to keep going up to Manchester to see him, which I love, which is an excuse to pop and see. It was and in fact, Johnny, I mean, he's just so lovely. He came out to join me and my son for dinner last time I went to visit Stan.
Oh, lovely.
You know, that's how lovely he is. Working with electronic was brilliant. I mean, when we actually did because I've done various stuff with it, I did the albums, but there was the one band bit, and it was literally, I said about this in my book, it was like literally the greatest band that never was. You know, it was the mid-90s, and we did a load of TV promo, went around Europe, did Thank God It's Friday and all that stuff. And it was just, and it was where I met Jed Lynch, who to this day is still one of my dearest friends and my favorite drummer in the world, you know, which is why I took him to do the stuff I did with Pete Townsend last year. And I would say we had this joke that whenever we got together, whenever we mentioned electronic, we both just go quiet and glumly look at our pints because, you know, because it should have been, and because Johnny and Bernard can both be such old women. You know, and they were really good at blaming each other. Well, I'd like to do it, but I don't think John. You know, this is the reason we didn't tour properly. John doesn't want to. John would go, well, no, God, Bernard doesn't want to do it. And then until it was actually on our podcast when Johnny on air fessed up, went, Guy, it was me. I just don't like going on tour. And he's absolutely right. I mean, it's fair, but it was so much fun doing that. My favorite story, which is in the book, is when we did where was it? It might have been Stockholm, where Bernard actually got thrown out of a club for whistling on the dance floor because he just has this thing when he's dancing, he sort of whistles.
Yeah.
Right. And they threw him out.
I mean, surely that's just got to be some doorman that just wants to go, I threw the geezer out a new order out of a club for whistling. Just wanted a little story.
Yeah, exactly. But no, because my favorite story of that is that we stayed in this hotel in Stockholm, and it was one of those ones where you went in and you turn your TV on, and rather than being CNN or the local whatever, it was just immediate, super hardcore porn, right? Just weird, like just mad jiggling pinkness. You couldn't even figure out what was going on, and you know, and you had to get through 3 channels of that just to get to CNN or the weather or anything, you know. And And we all had it. I mean, we all came down to breakfast. We went, fucking hell, man. What was on your TV? And we were all going, oh my God. And then we went and did this TV show where we did a number, and it was like a sort of, Good Morning, one show, magazine type show. But it had quite a big elaborate set. And it was, I don't know if it was Valentine's Day or something, but the theme of the show that week was love. And they literally had these giant heart balloons and arrows and cupids and stuff all over the studio. And what they are, spoke to everyone. And so we did this number, and then Johnny and Bernard go and sit on the sofa with the hosts. Right. And the lady goes, so, Bernard, as you see, the theme of our show is love. So can you tell me, to you, one of those ridiculous questions, what is love? Because Brent Bernard went, well, it's not what was on my hotel telly last night.
Love it. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Right. I mean, we're talking about Bernard, who's created some of the greatest electronic music of all time, which you imagine so
amazing.
much that would have soundtracked places like the Hacienda. I'm trying to thumb another link in here. Tell me the song that soundtracked your years clubbing, please, Guy.
I don't know if it's one that soundtracked my years, but I picked The Message by Grandmaster Flash, the Furious Five, because it was when we were all so into hip hop.
Yeah.
And we used to get these mixtapes sent over from New York of Todd Terry's show on Kiss FM. They used to do every Friday night. And I used to go to this place, the Language Lab, which was like the first, youth used to come with me. It was we had this jazz band that used to play there, and then I used to play along with DJs.
Was that in London?
That was that was at Gossips. It was the same place that same place that Billy's was. So where Gary had been downstairs at the Bowie night.
Yeah,
I was upstairs at this hip hop thing, and but the thing was that hip hop was so great and fresh, but it was just all this self-aggrandizing, hotel, motel, Holiday Inn, and Cadillac, and we're all waiting for because this amazing, because as we've seen as it's gone on, and ultimately I would say resulting in Hamilton, that how rap is just the best dialogue delivery system ever invented. And so when The Message, which is basically the what's going on of rap, isn't it? When that came out, I remember it was just so, oh my God, that's what we've been waiting for. And it was just like for every club you went to, you were just waiting for that to come on. And when it did come on, I remember but the Notting Hill Carnival that year, that's all you heard. And it was brilliant, and it's played, by the way, that amazing rhythm section of Doug Wimbish and the drummer. No, I've had one of those terrible moments. Anyway, that house rhythm section.
You said something there about how you'd get your hip hop sent over from the States, these mixtapes. And as somebody that was kind of 13 when this sort of stuff was happening, it felt like, and I hope it felt the same for most people that were experiencing hip hop, because it was this new music that sounded so American and so punk and so exciting and different. And as a kid, I could only get if Flash might have been on Top of the Pops. That was all you'd see.
Yeah.
And there was, you wasn't getting anything. It was Dave Allen's radio show, wasn't it, in London? Like some early hip hop and stuff. But it was just, you just get any little kind of scraps of hip hop you could get, because it was so hard to get hold of. And I think that just for me made it even more exciting and interesting, because it wasn't particularly an English thing, certainly not at that point. It was all about this stuff, and everything in America at that point, as a kid, it was all, the films was, it was E.T., it was all of this stuff, everything was very American and super exciting and larger than life. And this music come out that sounded like it had been beamed down from outer space, and it felt so exciting and so alien as well.
Well, also, there's a whole social cultural thing. You remember being that few years older, which is for us, New York, right, I'd gone there for the first time in 1978. I was so scared. New York was the scariest place on earth. If they just invented mugging, they had, so when the city was bankrupt and the whole New York punk scene, which was brilliant, but so dark. Everything about it was darkness and threatening. And
And all the films then were made about the Bronx
and Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
And, it was that New York was that. And so, whereas disco and soul and everything was so aspirational and up and everything. So there was, there didn't seem, this was suddenly, there was something coming out of the black culture there, which was absolutely dreadful. But what people seem to forget, right, is that hip hop was based on such incredible positivity. And, and it was a community thing. Someone said, in a way, it's like it was a response to when Reagan introduced these programs where suddenly people couldn't learn musical instruments at school. No one had instruments. So you turn the turntable into an instrument, and it was, and you had all these breakdance crews who were gangs who'd been killing each other, so it was, it was like something out of a cheesy musical, so we were getting this whole message of positive, because we were going through the same thing with the Thatcher and the Falklands, and so it was this wonderful kind of transatlantic joint positivity thing that was happening.
Absolutely. Right, before I take you home for track 6, tell me about working, because as somebody that plays bass, this band had an incredible bass player for many, many years. So I'm presuming it would have been around Elemental that you played with Tears for Fears.
Oh yeah, it was. I only played on one song,
right?
And in fact, I'm not even on the whole song. I only do half the song, and I kind of thought I'd put it out. In fact, but when we had Roland on the podcast, I said, you'd probably. He said, "Oh no, it's amazing what you did." And but I never got asked back, so it's one of those things I always assumed I did something wrong, because I do. It was just an afternoon. I just drove all the way down to his studio. The thing I remember is he had this beautiful old yellow Citroen outside, one of those big ones with the suspension that goes up and down, and he had this lovely huge room. And I remember him while I was doing the track. He had because computers were huge there, and he had 2 screens, which was unbelievably impressive. And I remember he asked me when I was born and what time and everything, and he had this computer program. He was doing my star chart. He was doing my birth chart, and I got this terrible feeling that so after, when I didn't get called back, I thought he must have not liked my star chart.
I mean, where in the world is it where we've got to start putting our star charts on our CVs to make out if we're all right, if we make the grade?
I had an experience of this before, which was, I remember when I came home from the first leg of the Pink Floyd tour, the Christmas 1987, right? And I was probably an unbearable asshole at the time.
Yeah,
probably a complete dick, and anyone would be. And Q Padgham invited me to his Christmas party, and I remember I was there, and I met Howard Jones, and I'd just been doing everything. When I was in LA, I'd played on Peter Cetera's record. It's like, yeah, I'm that guy, right now. And it's like, and then Howard Jones is introduced to me. I go, oh, what, you Guy Pratt? Yeah, I'm Guy Pratt. And it's just like, and it's, oh man, maybe you'd like to come on my record. It's like, of course he's going to ask me to play on this record. Why wouldn't anyone ask me to play on their record? Like, so it's probably more to do with that. But he started taking my number down, because that's what you used to do. You would write someone's phone number down. And he started writing my number down. And then he went, oh, what star sign are you?
Oh, no, not again.
No, this was before that. And he said, and I said, Capricorn. He went, oh, and the enthusiasm just seemed to wilt.
I love the fact you think you're king of a tree coming back off your tour. You get slammed for being a Capricorn.
Yeah, he sort of barely finished the last 2 numbers.
Oh, so did you end up working with
probably just it's probably just occurring to him as like, actually, this guy is a massive tool.
Did you ever work with Howard Jones?
No.
Bloody Capricorns.
Do you know what, I'm going to have to go back and look at every bass player he's ever worked with and see if ever any of them are Capricorns. Is Nick Beggs a Capricorn? I've never asked Nick.
Nick Beggs is playing for him now, isn't he?
I know. No, I know Nick is. Nick is a name that comes up everywhere. It comes up all the time on the podcast. And I love that. I love that Nick is part of our firmament.
He was playing the most complicated instrument. When I saw Howard Jones last year.
Oh, playing a stick, the Chapman stick.
Yeah, it looked very, very muso and very overcomplicated.
Well, because it's one of those things I was going to, in the 80s when I was, you know, really serious about my playing and everything, where I was going to get a Chapman stick because it's what Tony Levin was playing, it's what Alphonso Johnson was playing. And it seemed like a thing to do until you suddenly realize, actually, they're only playing 2 strings on it.
Really?
Really, yeah, they're not really doing this because the bass on the stick sounds fantastic. But
Yeah.
as soon as once you start playing full stick, it gets a bit kind of Windham Hill, sort of
Yeah.
new age. In fact, you know what? I'll tell you something. I've never said this publicly before, but I met because when I started doing my stand-up, one of the first big break was I got asked to be on this radio show, brilliant radio show that Roland Riveron used to do called Jamming.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was in the band for that, but I was first time I was on as a guest with Kate Robbins, the wonderful Kate Robbins, who actually went on to direct my show and everything, and I've got nothing but eternal love for her, and Emily Atack's mum, in
Yeah.
fact, and but when Nick Beggs was on, and he got his Chapman stick out, and Kate said the funniest. I said, oh, those things are amazing. I was going to learn one, but it's so complicated. I just don't know if I could do it. And Kate just said, yeah, but when you see one of those, you just think buskers.
Incredible.
It's so true. So when do you see a Chapman stick? You don't see one at Wembley, mate. You see a bloke on the South Bank.
Completely. Love that. Oh, wonderful. Well, look, I've asked you to send over your tracks in advance like I do every other guest. And for track 6, I always take guests home to their home county and I ask them for one. And you replied with, there's just too many.
Do you know what it's got to be? Thinking about it, it's really, really obvious, which is that I was born and raised in Waterloo. So it's
Okay.
Waterloo Sunset, isn't it?
Of course it is. And do you know what? Every now and again, that record comes on. And I'm as much as this is my podcast and I push people for favourite records, I'd never be able to sort of pick my all-time favourite record. The Ronettes is up there, but I just think every time Waterloo Sunset comes on, I think this is as close to perfect as it gets.
And also, especially even just Dave's guitar part.
Yeah.
Is so perfect, which is essentially George's part from Day Tripper.
Yeah. So
no, or is it Day Tripper or Ticket to Ride?
It's Day Tripper.
Yeah, it's Day Tripper. Yeah,
yeah. So I'm always interested to know with sort of musicians that have you know you've played with literally everybody. When you sit down and hear a new bit of music, do you listen to it on face value or are you deconstructing
I
it?
try, but I can't. This is why I'm mainly listening to classical music, to be honest, these days.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because because I can't.
Yeah.
You know, I'm basically listening to Mahler mainly at the moment.
Yeah.
And the terrible thing is actually, but I approach Mahler with my rock ears,
Yeah.
not my 21st century ears, and all I can hear is the riffs. It's like, fucking hell, man! You want to talk about riffs? It's like, you know, Mahler was Jimmy Page.
Yeah. Well, look.
But yes, no, you're right. It's a terrible thing, and especially when my son sends me stuff. Although when my son sends me stuff of his, and I'm really impressed with his production and stuff. You just think, where did you learn that? But yeah, the thing I do, there's an upside to. I mean, it's very bad for new music, but it's great for old music because I now go back and listen to stuff that I thought sounded a certain way, and it doesn't. And you realize that lots of stuff was a lot more hokey and a lot less, especially people like Trevor Horn, for instance, where the whole point of those records where you're stepping into a Maxfield Parrish perfect sort of Elysian world of, you know, and but you go back and, you know, they're as good as they ever were. This, you know, Slave to the Rhythm is still the best, but it's now I can hear the guy playing the guitar, I can hear the drums, I can hear the, you know, and it's like it's not superhuman.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's in some records that's nice. There are some things like Quadrophenia or Ziggy Stardust where I'll never be able to equate that with people in a room playing. It's just too Olympian.
That's where the magic is, that bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Same with The Wall or something. With Comfortably Numb, I never, I've been in the studio with David. I know what it's like, and Rick.
yeah.
I know what it's like, but it's not. But it's like when I did it, it's not what they were doing before.
Yeah.
It just can't be,
Well, I want to put you in the studio before I ask you the last track, and I listened to an interview a while ago with Brian Eno, and he said like not who was the best, but who was the most prolific musician that you've seen work. And he said the band James were prolific. He said like they would just jam and put these incredible songs together. Of all the artists that you've worked with, who would you like literally marvel at how productive and prolific they were?
Oh, I can't think. I don't know because I'm not really around people enough. I'll tell you someone who it used to just fall out of all the time was Gary Moore.
Really?
Yeah, and he was doing a different, the album that I did with him as well. There's the Britpop song, there's the Barry White song, there's the blues workout, there's he was just taking everything in all the time, and then he was forever playing stuff like the kind of, he did when he did the Greedy Bastards, the stuff.
Yeah.
But then he's got a whole album's worth of demos that he did with Stephen Paul as well. Has got, he's had tons and tons and tons of stuff. And it's just that sheer unbridled love of just like, he just needs to do stuff. So, I can't think. I mean, people I tend to work with aren't the most prolific people in the
world. All right. Well, you can be tastemaker now for your last track, and I'm going to ask you to recommend a song to our listeners that you think they may not know that you would like them to hear.
Well, actually, I did. The song I suggested to you might be the wrong choice. I was going to say That's the Way I Like It by Casey and the Sunshine
Band.
Band.
About that, though.
But I'll tell you why. That's just because of one bass note in it. Because there's always been something about that. I thought it's a great track and it's a great arrangement. But there's something in it. There's something almost supernatural that makes me absolutely. And there's a wrong bass note. It's not a wrong bass note. It's in the classical sense. It's actually the correct minor note, but it's what we would call incorrect in that it's like the major. But it's basically on the bass. I'll show you where it goes. Right, that where it goes. It should go da-dum. Da-dum, da-dum, right? But it goes da-dum. And that's a really major point at the start of the song.
Is that a major point for anybody in the world apart from Guy Pratt?
I think on a subconscious level it is, yeah, because it goes against everything you've ever heard in pop music.
Yeah.
But no, the song I would say everyone should listen to because it is, to me, it seems to me to somehow bend space and time, and it's impossible, which is the most perfectly constructed and created pop song ever written, which is The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore.
Oh, my God.
Because it's got literally everything a pop song has. It has a verse, a chorus, a bridge, a middle eight, and a key change, and it's less than 3 minutes long. And it's not even fast. And it's I don't know.
Are we going Walker Brothers version?
Yeah, Walker Brothers version.
Yeah.
And that's one of the proudest things in my life. I got to play on Cher's version.
Wow.
With Trevor Horn producing.
I mean, that'd do, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Came up with a really, really nice. But I was playing acoustic guitar. Trevor, I don't always play bass for Trevor. Trevor has this theory, and he's absolutely right, which is when it comes to acoustic guitar, get anyone to play it except the guitarist. Literally anyone. If there's
What's the logic behind that?
Because on an acoustic guitar, a guitarist is going to go, I could go, or I can give you this, or I can give you this. When what you want is C, 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 G, 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 G.
Yeah.
It's like literally get the guy delivering the pizza to play the fucking acoustic guitar before you ask the guitarist. And he got me to play, and he said, and I came up with this bit for it, a really nice little plucky bit. I was very proud of it. And I said, what do you think of that? He said, oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'll definitely use that. And then I went back and he said, yeah, I'm using that bit. And I said, I said, and there's a little something happening with it. I went, oh, great. What you got happening? So I've got a jet airliner taking off over it. It's like, oh, thanks a lot, mate.
I'm so glad you chose that track because I honestly think it's an absolute
perfect. It's
masterpiece.
It's perfect.
And in the passing of Bacharach last week, I went and listened to Make It Easy on Yourself, and then it just led me back down to other Walker Brothers stuff, and it was the voice is just amazing. The arrangement is perfect, and yeah, that's Frankie Valli, isn't it? Wrote that.
Oh, right, is it?
Yeah, Frankie
You know,
Valli.
I've never. You think I'd have checked that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's 4
but
seasons.
I remember finding out, and it was actually David Gilmour who told me this, and I'd never thought about it because he recorded a version with his daughter Romany years and years and years ago, just as a Christmas thing, which is Close to You.
But the Bacharach.
Yeah, but which you just thought I thought it's a Carpenter song.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was the Carpenters, and it's like no, but Burt Bacharach wrote it, and it was originally a Dionne Warwick B-side.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that, but I remember it's one of those things. Remember when you're told that's written by Burt Bacharach? It's like, of course it fucking is. Of course, as if it ever wasn't.
Yeah.
No, I now feel ashamed that there isn't any Bacharach in there. But
we've given him a nod, so that's great. We make it easy for listeners of the podcast to go and listen to all of the tracks we've spoken about today, guys. We put a little Spotify playlist together to accompany the podcast, nice. So people can go and listen to everything. And we put some bits of your stuff on there as well, of course. So for the rest of this year, what's going to be happening with podcasts and with books, gigs? What's happening? What are you doing?
There's a lot of podcasts coming up. There's actually going to hopefully some exciting developments with Rock on Tours. I can't say what because we're not entirely sure what they are, but there's various options. So there's going to be some Sources gigs in the summer in Europe, not over here, not in England, but unfortunately, and there's a very, very, very unbelievably big, exciting thing that I can't talk about.
You can't just say that.
I can't talk that. It's okay, but let me say it. Okay, just to stop the forums melting down. It's nothing to do with Pink Floyd. It's actually nothing. It's nothing to do with any musical artist, you know. All right, it's just to stop any speculation there. But it's incredibly exciting, which means it clearly won't happen.
And so, Guy, if people want to keep up to speed with all things in the world of Guy Pratt, where's the best place to keep up to speed with you?
I have a website, but I don't. It was it was a labor of love by a friend of mine, very lovely guy in Portugal for years. So just my Facebook, Guy Pratt Official on Facebook and Guy Pratt Official on Instagram.
Wonderful.
And Twitter if you want to hear my political rantings, but I don't really do that anymore. I can't. I've got a podcast now. I can't abuse politicians anymore.
It's always good to do that, though. Guy, honestly, mate, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure just nattering tunes with you.
It was lovely. Yeah, lovely. No, I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. I'm going to press stop.
You got some good
stuff. Don't go anywhere.